We are on wordradio.com, heard throughout the nation, throughout the world at wordradio.com on our robust live stream. Also, you're watching us on WURD TV at youtube.com/onword and facebook.com/forward as well. Joining us now is Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor. She is the founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust. For more information, go to nvcit.org. Jessica, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate this. I think it's the first time we've had you on, but I know we've had some of your folks because you were, at one point, you were communications director, right, for the National Fair Housing Alliance. So and you used to help us out, provide us with quite a bit of information on what was happening with the Fair Housing Act and housing issues, housing equity issues. So really appreciate having you on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, excellent, excellent. So where are we currently in the reparations conversation debate, and also, you know, what we're trying to do with policy? Because we've been having this conversation off and on throughout this broadcast right here today. People just so happened asked about reparations. They didn't know you were coming on a little bit later on, but it's the first time in modern political history. It's not the first time in American history now, because there was a very serious moment in American history where reparations was a thing, but then it went dormant for obvious reasons, and now this is the first time in modern political history where we're having a mainstream conversation on it. So where is that conversation right now, you think?
Well, it's in a lot of different places. First of all, this is the first time that the House Judiciary Committee voted to move H.R. 40 to the House floor for a vote. So that's historic. This is the first time that has ever happened since 1989, when John Conyers first brought the legislation up. And so there's a lot of different things happening at once. We have this movement for national reparations through H.R. 40. There's local reparations efforts. There's efforts with religious institutions to provide reparations for the participation that they had in the enslavement of African peoples. So we're pretty much all over the place, but the consensus is that we are owed reparations and that the time is now.
You know, talk to us too about, okay, so we have H.R. 40. Well, first, I want to just get your insights, your thoughts on how likely passage is in the House, you know, in the full House passing. Got a lot of co-sponsors. How many co-sponsors? I haven't checked that recently.
188.
188. So still shy of that majority you need to pass H.R. 40. But are we more encouraged that H.R. 40 could pass the House?
I think we're encouraged. It can pass. I think that right now, with the way the conversation is moving, I think that it is likely to pass. I think that we're in a moment in America, especially with what just happened with George Floyd. I think that there was a significant shift in understanding the reality of people of African descent in this country. And I think that it is a possibility. It's obviously not a shoo-in, but I do think that there's a strong possibility that it could pass.
What do you think happened, Jessica, where there was, for so many years, the reparations conversation was kind of put in sort of the political fringe, right? It was considered like a political fringe argument, you know, just more sort of, you know, just activists kind of focused on it who were kind of considered not a part of the political mainstream. Maybe, you know, you would have something like the most mainstream it would ever get, at least from my experience, would be, you know, you'd have conversations or panels on it occasionally at like Congressional Black Caucus Week, right? So like what happened? Like what was that spark that suddenly, because it started with the 2020 presidential race where suddenly like all the presidential candidates on the Democratic side are talking about it?
Well, I think what happened is each generation has its call, has its calling, and we just continue to be Black in America. And it seems as if we have done everything that we could possibly do. We have voted, we have marched, we have protested, we have rebelled, we have done everything possible. And what has happened, especially with Ta-Nehisi Coates, the case for reparations, that really helped with kind of like this cosmic shift and then more and more writers discussing the racial wealth gap and discussing Black Lives Matter and discussing police brutality and understanding that as a nation, it appears that we cannot move forward until this issue is rectified, until there is some type of reparative justice. And by reparative justice, I mean more than a check, more than money, but full repair, as in COBRA, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, they push for full reparations, which includes more than a cash payout. But I think that we've seen all that we could see, and with the public lynching of George Floyd, that even more solidified the call for reparations. And now with the Tulsa 100th year commemoration, it even more so highlighted the devastation that we have faced as a people in this nation, and that we still do not have full repair. Even as I speak, there's a tweet of mine going viral right now about how $30 million was raised for the Tulsa commemoration, and not a dime of it went to the survivors or any of the descendants. And so that's a whole issue. But we see now, we've been seeing it, we've been knowing this, but I think it's this continual push as more and more of our issues come to the mainstream, and we're not letting up, we're not letting it go, that the issue continues to come to the forefront.
Yeah. We're talking, if you're just now tuning in, we're talking with the founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust, NBCIT.org. For more information, is Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor. She's a longtime advocate on this issue of reparations, and NBCIT is a coalition, sort of a consortium of many of those those major advocacy groups that, like in COBRA you just mentioned a while ago, you all collaborate and push forward on this issue of reparations, particularly on the federal level. Do you still feel like, though, and just your thoughts, your reflections, Jessica, on whether or not like reparations, because there's still that backlash, whereas there's this big growing movement that's happening now, this big push to achieve reparations. Of course, we're going to get the white lash, right? You're going to get the backlash, and and folks and so there's that still kind of that popular discourse branding issue with reparations. I don't even know if it's not really a branding issue. It's just like, it's just racism, really. That thought, that notion of like, I mean, that's what happened 100 years ago. Black people reached some full economic parity with white people, or reach some level of impressive wealth, asset generation. There's going to be a very violent backlash. Do you worry about that? How do we reconcile that, or kind of crack through that?
Well, we've been living under violence for the past over 400 years in this country, and that's always a risk. As we saw with Breonna Taylor, violence is a risk, sleeping in our beds. But we have to continue the push for reparative justice and full repair. And I think that, some people do see it as like a branding issue. How do you get past certain groups, right-wingers, conservatives that may hold up, and even some leftists that may feel that reparations is a wasted cause. But at the end of the day, there has still been no remedy, and we keep bumping up against the same wall continuously. And so there is going to be no end to it until we get full repair and reparative justice. I think that we have to acknowledge some people can be swayed. We can make the argument that by the continual systemic racism that is heaped upon African Americans, it continues to not only hold back our community, but hold back the forward movement of the nation. We could make that argument, but at the end of the day, this is about full repair for descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, DAEUS. And there are going to be racists that counter our every move. We've encountered racists during the Civil Rights Movement. We've encountered racists during Black Lives Matter movement. At one hand, we're preaching nonviolence and we're celebrated for nonviolence, and then we rebel, and we were also Martin Luther King was labeled a terrorist, even though he was nonviolent. At every juncture that we go through, it seems as if no matter what we do, we're demonized. So we might as well fight for what is right for ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're just going to have to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you know, the framework, because you know you kind of hinted at that where you were saying, you know, this has to be comprehensive, reparative, restorative justice that's happening here, and it can't simply be just a cut check. It's got to be a lot more expansive than that. And so, explain, you know, talk about. I mean, what's the thinking behind? What's the planning behind? Like, okay, as we're pushing for reparations, trying to get things like HR 40 passed. You also have, and I want to ask you about that in a few moments about like different efforts that are happening on the state and local level. Um, but like, are we imagining what that reparations framework, that reparations infrastructure looks like? Like, what would reparations hypothetically look like if it were passed, if it were implemented and deployed?
Well, I think that's the beauty of really needing HR 40 because it would study all of those things on so many different levels. But I can say that it would look like one, an apology, an official apology from the United States of America for not only the enslavement of our ancestors, but for all of the systemic racism that was the birth child of that enslavement that perpetually continued our systemic oppression. And then there would be I do think that there would be a pay component, a cash component, though that's not the emphasis, not the end all be all, but it is important to have that cash payout component in some type of a way, whether it be a lump sum, whether it be spread out over time. Some people view it as being poured into community initiatives or grants and that type of thing. It looks like many different things, but it also includes an attempt to decouple that structural racism in housing, in banking, in education that continues to deny us access to upward mobility.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the with that it can't be sort of like you know, nibbling at the edges here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these have to be like things that are very ambitious and very bold in terms of, okay, if we're talking like we truly like housing, for example, if we feel like we truly need like housing equity, we want to get black folks into their own homes, you know, to stop renting to be homeowners. Okay, well then, like, let's set up a situation here where like they don't have to have the like the down payment is covered. You know what I mean? Like the closing costs are covered. Everything's covered. You know, that's you know, they get their house. Like, let's truly do this. What is that price tag? Do we know? Well, I guess that's why HR 40. That's another reason why we need HR 40 to assess. Like, what is the? Do you know? Like, is there kind of a universal price tag for reparations? How many trillions of dollars?
There is not a universal price tag.
Got it.
Seen estimates as low as, I mean, one thing we can say is many economists and historians agree that it's in the trillions. It would be in the trillions if we really account for not only enslavement, but Jim Crow and all of the systemic racism that denied us our full upward mobility. It would be in the trillions. I've seen as low as like 1.6 trillion up to all the way as high as 17 trillion that it could be. But there is no one general consensus, which is why HR 40 would be so important in this endeavor.
To be able to study that, to get that full price tag. What's the business case, right? For like, okay, so, you know, going back to like, doesn't matter what we do, we're going to get the backlash is going to happen. You know, so people are going to have a visceral, hostile, just like violent reaction to whatever it is we do, but we just got to keep soldiering on, right? But still, like, is there a business case, an alluring kind of like appealing business case to like white people that, hey, you know what, reparations for us works out for you too? You know, it's kind of like the recent, I'm sure you saw it, right? What came out last year, the report from Citibank, of all people, where they were saying, and the Nat sister, she did that report and then left Citibank like a couple of months after, which was kind of weird and bizarre. But where they were saying like the cost of racism over the past, what was it, 10 years? The financial cost, $16 trillion. And that if you ended racism today, there would be an immediate infusion of cash into the economy in the trillions of dollars. I think it was like $5 or $6 trillion. If you just immediately one day say, okay, we're going to end racism today. What is that business case for reparations, you think?
Charles, I think it's the same. I think it's on the same lines. It's definitely like when we look at banking, there will be whole black neighborhoods denied access to banking. And it's not that the banks couldn't set up there and they couldn't make money. They just
Right.
choose not to because it's a certain area, right? And they will literally lose their own money rather than set up in certain communities. So there's definitely a business case for if we prioritize African Americans, if we provide full access, it will definitely, it is definitely a case that it would benefit the businesses that they patronize. But at the same time, you mentioned my work in fair housing. One of the things I learned is that when it comes to racism, it's just really illogical. We have seen banks refuse to fix up their own bank-owned homes in black neighborhoods, willingly losing millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Basically just not caring because it's in a black neighborhood. They are
Just
losing
for
their
spite.
own money.
Yeah.
They allow the homes to just totally dilapidate and be destroyed, and they can't even sell them, and it just brings down the value of the whole neighborhood. But at the same time, the banks are losing money. So sometimes when it comes to racism, even those logical arguments about, well, this would benefit you, don't always work because they don't care.
They don't care.
Some races will really, they will lose money rather than see us have upward mobility. And I know some people think, well, in America, the only color that matters is green, but statistics and the fair housing movement will show you otherwise. They'll deny you housing even if you have the money just because your skin is black.
Wow.
And the same with banking. Yeah. So it can be argued, but it's not necessarily always going to be a successful argument.
A successful argument, or it has to be like the leading argument that you go in there with. So, just being,
because the leading argument is our peoplehood.
Right.
Who we are as a people and what happened to us. And that's why we have to center it, because if we try to bend and please and try to we can make those arguments, but at the end of the day, what happened to us is the core concern, and what continues to happen to us is our core concern. We have to rectify what happened in the past to our ancestors. We have to rectify what continues to happen, and we have to secure a black future for our children and generations so that we don't continue to deal with not only the racial wealth gap, but continued systemic and structural racism and oppression that holds us back.
Those tensions, you hinted at that earlier in this conversation, those tensions between, you even have progressive groups who are saying, well, maybe this is not a hill that we need to die on today or stand on. This is wasted energy. But you have that other issue too of okay, now reparations has gone mainstream, the conversation. Other groups want to jump on the bandwagon. From the way I'm looking at it, it can't just be black reparations. Oh, we got to have other causes and other groups, demographic groups, who are also jumping on this. And everyone's dealing with the war against white supremacy and racism. Everybody on all their different unique ways. But when we talk about reparations, are we just talking about black reparations, or are we going to talk about reparations in order to get it, to achieve it? Do we talk about comprehensive reparations for all those, black people, but also indigenous people, a reparations package for them, and Latinos? And I noticed that there's a lot of tension there, and it is causing a lot of a lot of interesting discourse and debate around that, and a bad reaction too from a lot of black people who are very hopeful that something like this can get pushed through.
Well, one thing I can say is that there's definitely coalitions and support from people of different backgrounds. We see that the descendants of Japanese internment survivors have come out in support of HR 40 for African Americans, and they received reparations to the tune of $1.6 billion for about 82,000 people. I believe they received about $20,000 each. For reparations, and they support. There are different groups that are certainly supportive. There are even white groups that have sprouted up in support of reparations for African Americans. I think that though we can acknowledge what has happened with our indigenous peoples, they have received varying forms of reparations, though it is certainly not the full repair that they deserve. We can acknowledge that while also saying this is our struggle, this is our fight for what happened to us, for what happened to our ancestors. We can acknowledge that other groups of people may be owed reparations and even support those reparations struggle. But in the case of HR 40, this is for descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States.
We've been talking now with Jessica Ann Mitchell Aiwuyor. She is the founder of the National Black Cultural Information Trust, NBCIT.org. For more information on them, that's the website that you need to go to. Also, Jessica is going to be joining us a little bit later on in the month. We have a upcoming conversation on reparations, on the reparations, like what would that look like? That's the name of the discussion that's being produced by the Council of State Governments Eastern Regional Conference, Council on Communities of Color. So I'll be moderating and hosting that discussion. And Jessica, you'll be joining us with policymaker and a few other voices in that debate. So definitely looking, including Rashawn Ray from Brookings, Mike Green, who's a regular contributor here, and some others. So definitely looking forward to seeing you then. And we got to bring you back and just continue having this conversation. I really appreciate it, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, be safe. Thanks again.